There is a piece of land that changes country twice a year, not because anyone is fighting over it, because it is scheduled. For 6 months of the year, it is Spanish. Then, on the 1st of August, without a single soldier moving and without one word of argument, it quietly becomes French. 6 months later, it turns Spanish again. It has been doing this for more than 350 years, and in all that time, not one shot has ever been fired over it. Nobody lives there. Nobody is allowed to set foot on it. It is smaller than 2 football pitches. And 2 of the proudest nations in Europe still take turns owning it, on a timetable, because of a promise they once made to each other about a girl. To understand why, you have to go back to 1659 and to 2 empires that had spent 24 years destroying each other. France and Spain had been at war since 1635. Both countries were bankrupt. Both were exhausted. Both wanted it to stop. But there was a problem that sounds almost childish now and was deadly serious then. Neither king would travel into the other's kingdom to sign a peace. To cross that border would be to admit you were the lesser man. So they found a loophole, a small, muddy, unremarkable island sitting in the middle of the river that formed the border between them, land that belonged in a sense to nobody. And there, on neutral ground, their negotiators met. It took them 24 separate conferences, spread over 11 years, to hammer out the terms. And on the 7th of November, 1659, on that scrap of river mud, they signed the Treaty of the Pyrenees. 124 articles. Whole provinces changing hands. The map of Western Europe, redrawn on an island you could walk across in 2 minutes. But the treaty had a price, and the price was not a province, or a fortress, or a pile of gold. It was a person. This is Pheasant Island. In French, Ile de Faisan. In Spanish, Isla de los Faisanes. Although there are no pheasants on it, and there probably never were. The name is most likely a mistranslation, one that stuck for 4 centuries. It sits in the Bidasoa River, in the western Pyrenees, right where France and Spain meet the sea. On one bank is the French town of Ondaye. On the other is the Spanish town of Irun. And in the middle of the water is this island, 1.69 acres, about 200 meters long. If you look at it on a satellite map today, you can see the international border running down the river, and you can see it bend politely around this little wooded sliver, because the border does not know what to do with it either. Now, back to 1660, because signing the treaty was only half the deal. To seal the peace permanently, the 2 royal houses had to be joined. Philip IV of Spain would give his daughter, the Infanta Maria Teresa, to Louis XIV of France, and the handover would take place on the island, which meant somebody had to organize it. And the man Spain chose for the job is the reason this story stops being a piece of border trivia and becomes something else entirely. They gave it to Diego Velázquez. If that name means nothing to you, Velázquez is one of the greatest painters who has ever lived. He was court painter to the King of Spain. He painted Las Meninas, which some people will tell you is the single greatest painting in the world. And in the spring of 1660, the Spanish crown looked at this man and handed him a clipboard. Velázquez was 61 years old. And for 2 solid months he project managed a river island. He designed and oversaw the building of the pavilion that would sit exactly on the borderline, with 1/2 in Spain and 1/2 in France. He arranged the decorations, the tapestries, the banquet, the costumes, the entertainment. He organized the gardening. The greatest artist in Europe spent the last working summer of his life deciding where to put the flower beds, so that 2 kings would never have to stand in the wrong country. He pulled it off. The meeting on the 7th of June, 1660, was one of the last great face-to-face summits between 2 reigning monarchs in the whole of the 17th century. And then, 8 weeks later, on the 6th of August, Velázquez was dead. He never painted anything again. Historians have long linked his death to the sheer exhaustion of that commission. The man who painted Las Meninas finished his career arranging chairs on a sandbank. Now we get to the person the whole treaty was actually built on. Maria Teresa was 21 years old. She was the daughter of the King of Spain, and she had spent her entire life inside the Spanish court. On the 3rd of June, 1660, in a town on the Spanish coast, she was married to Louis XIV of France. She was not there, neither was he. It was a proxy marriage. A nobleman stood in for the groom. She was legally married to a man she had never met, in a country she had never seen, as a term in a peace treaty she had no part in negotiating. And then came the moment that I cannot get out of my head. Maria Teresa, walked from the Spanish side of that pavilion to the French side. That was it. That was the whole ceremony. A young woman, walking a few meters across a wooden floor, out of her father's kingdom and into her husband's. She went in as a Spanish princess. She came out the other side as the Queen of France, and that distance, that handful of steps, was the entire width of her old life. Behind her, she left her father. They said goodbye there on the island, and they both understood exactly what it meant. She was not going to visit. There would be no coming home. In the 17th century, a Spanish princess sent to France was gone, and they were right. Philip IV died 5 years later. Father and daughter never saw each other again. Those farewells, by every account, were devastating. So raw that Louis XIV himself and his brother both wept as they watched a father let go of his daughter on a muddy little island in the middle of a river. And that's the part I keep turning over. If you had been Maria Theresa, 21 years old, standing on the Spanish side of that pavilion, and knowing exactly what those few steps would cost you, could you have walked across? Or would you have refused, whatever it did to the peace? Tell me honestly in the comments. And if these small, forgotten places with enormous stories buried in them are your kind of thing, take a second and subscribe, because I've got a lot more of them coming. Because there is one more turn in this story, and it is a bitter one. Maria Theresa did not cross that island for free. There was a contract. In exchange for her renouncing all claim to the Spanish throne, for herself and every child she would ever have, Spain agreed to pay France a dowry. 500,000 IQ, an enormous sum. Spain never paid it. They could not. The country was ruined, drained by decades of the very war that treaty had just ended. The money never came, and French lawyers, watching that deadline pass, realized what it meant. If Spain had not honored its side of the bargain, then Maria Theresa's renunciation was worthless, void. Which meant that his wife's claim to the Spanish throne was, in French eyes, alive again. Louis XIV used exactly that argument to invade Spanish territory in 1667, 7 years after the wedding. And decades later, that same reasoning helped put his own grandson on the throne of Spain. So think about what that little island actually witnessed. A peace treaty that took 11 years and 24 meetings to write, a young woman handed across a border to guarantee it, and within a decade, the unpaid bill for that very handover being used as the legal excuse to start fighting all over again. The island where the war ended became the paperwork for the next one. And yet, somehow, the arrangement made there has outlived all of it. Because the island was never given to either country. It stayed shared. And in the 1800s, France and Spain formalized what they had been doing informally for 2 centuries. From the 1st of February to the 31st of July, the island is Spanish. From the 1st of August to the 31st of January, it is French. 2 naval officers, the commanders at San Sebastian and at Bayonne, act as its governors. In fact, the French officer holds the title Viceroy of Pheasant Island, which is the only place in the entire French Republic where that quasi-royal word is still officially used. One of the men who held it was Pierre Loti, the novelist. In practice, the mayors of Irun and Ondaye look after it. Municipal gardeners row over roughly twice a year to cut the grass, and the 2 navies still send someone to check on it every 5 days. An uninhabited sandbank, 200 meters long, watched over by 2 national navies on a 5-day rota for a population of 0. Which leaves me with a question I'd genuinely like your take on. Almost every other shared territory like this in the world has quietly disappeared, dissolved when the empires that made them fell apart. This one just kept going. So why do you think this particular one survived? Is it because it's too small to argue about, or because both sides actually want the reminder? I'd love to read your theories below. Sometimes the smallest places hold the biggest stories. This one is a 200-meter strip of mud in a river, with a single stone monument on it, and it is slowly being eaten away by the current. Nobody lives on it. Nobody may land on it. And twice a year, quietly, without ceremony in most years, and without a single argument in 3.5 centuries, one great nation hands it to another and takes it back again 6 months later. It is the last working relic of a kind of diplomacy that has otherwise vanished from the earth. And it exists because, once, on that exact patch of ground, a 21-year-old woman took a few steps across a wooden floor, said goodbye to her father forever, and bought 2 exhausted empires a generation of peace they did not manage to keep. If you've ever heard of Pheasant Island, or stood on the riverbank at Ondai or Irun and looked out at it? Let me know in the comments. And let me know where I should go next. See you in the next one.